The fog clung to the moors surrounding Kensington Hall like a shroud, obscuring the towering spires that reached toward a dismal grey sky. A lone carriage rattled along the winding gravel path, its wheels crunching against stone as it delivered its solitary passenger to her fate. Penelope Harrington clutched her meagre belongings to her chest, the worn leather of her trunk a testament to the journey that had brought her here. The newspaper advertisement had been simple: Governess wanted. Must be accomplished in French, music, drawing, and mathematics. Experience preferred. Apply Kensington Hall, Yorkshire. She had applied with trembling hands, knowing this position represented her last hope. At 25, Penelope was considered firmly on the shelf, her prospects diminished not merely by age but by scandal that had trailed her from London like persistent shadows. The carriage jerked to a halt. The driver, a gruff man who had barely spoken during their journey, tossed her trunk to the ground with indifference. "Kensington Hall, miss," he announced, not bothering to help her descend. Penelope gathered her skirts and stepped down, the damp air immediately seeping through her thin woolen cloak. Before her loomed a grand manor house of grey stone, imposing in its Gothic splendor. Gargoyles peered from rain-darkened eaves, their stone faces twisted in eternal judgment. The massive oak door swung open before she could knock, revealing a stern-faced housekeeper whose eyes performed a swift assessment of Penelope's plain appearance. "Miss Harrington, I presume?" The woman's voice was as starched as her apron. "Yes, madam." Penelope curtsied slightly, aware of how her travel-worn appearance must strike the woman. "I am Mrs. Pembroke, housekeeper of Kensington Hall. His Grace expected your arrival yesterday." Penelope's cheeks flushed. "The mail coach was delayed by weather, Mrs. Pembroke. I do apologize. His Grace does not tolerate tardiness, but the matter shall be overlooked this once. Come along." Mrs. Pembroke turned on her heel, leaving Penelope to follow while a footman retrieved her trunk. The entrance hall was cavernous, its marble floors echoing with their footsteps. Portraits of stern-faced aristocrats lined the walls, their eyes following Penelope's progress with painted disdain. Mrs. Pembroke led her through a labyrinth of corridors, offering terse explanations of the house's layout. "The nursery wing is in the east tower. You shall take your meals there with the children, except Sundays when you are permitted to dine with the other staff. His Grace rarely entertains, but when he does, you will ensure the children remain unseen and unheard." Penelope nodded, committing each instruction to memory. Her previous position had ended in disgrace, she could not afford another failure. "You will have charge of Lord Vincent's 2 children, Mrs. Pembroke continued. Lady Sophia, who is 7, and Master Edward, who is 4. Their mother, the late Lady Kensington, passed 3 years ago. The children have had for governesses since. For governesses in 3 years. The implication was clear: either the children were ungovernable or Lord Kensington impossible to please. Neither boded well for Penelope's future. They arrived at a door at the top of a narrow staircase. Mrs. Pembroke knocked once before entering. The nursery was unexpectedly bright, with large windows overlooking the estate's extensive gardens. A girl sat primly at a small desk, her copper curls framing a heart-shaped face. Beside her on the window seat, a small boy with the same auburn hair was absorbed in a picture book. "Lady Sophia, Master Edward, your new governess has arrived. Miss Harrington, your charges." The girl, Lady Sophia, looked up with a practiced curtsy. "How do you do, Miss Harrington?" Her voice was perfect, her manners impeccable, but her eyes were calculating beyond her years. The boy, however, merely glanced up and returned to his book without acknowledgement. "I shall leave you to become acquainted," Mrs. Pembroke said. "His Grace wishes to interview you at 4 o'clock. Do not be late." With that final warning, she departed. Penelope took a deep breath and approached the children. "I'm very pleased to meet you both. I hope we shall become good friends." Lady Sophia's smile was brittle. "That's what Miss Whitman said too, before she left crying." "And Miss Preston," added Edward without looking up. "And Miss Thornhill." "And Miss Bailey," Sophia finished with satisfaction. Penelope maintained her composure. Well, I am not any of those ladies. I am Miss Harrington, and I intend to stay. Sophia's smile turned calculating. Papa will send you away. He always does. A chill ran down Penelope's spine, but she kept her voice steady. Perhaps, but until then, we might as well make the best of our time together. What were you studying before I arrived? The afternoon passed in wary assessment. The children were well educated but defensive, prone to testing boundaries with subtle defiance rather than outright rebellion. By the time the clock struck 3:45, Penelope's nerves were frayed but her resolve intact. Mrs. Pembroke reappeared to escort her to the library, where Lord Kensington awaited. Penelope smoothed her plain grey dress, wishing she had something more presentable to wear for this crucial meeting. The library was a magnificent room, 2 stories tall with bookshelves reaching toward a painted ceiling. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across leather-bound volumes. Before it stood a tall figure, his back to the door as he gazed into the flames. Miss Harrington, Your Grace, Mrs. Pembroke announced before withdrawing. Lord Vincent Kensington turned, and Penelope fought to maintain her composure. She had expected an older man, perhaps in his 50s. Instead, she found herself facing a gentleman who could not be above 35. His features were sharply aristocratic, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a mouth that seemed unaccustomed to smiling. His hair was the same copper shade as his children's, though darkness had begun to thread through the temples. Miss Harrington. His voice was deep, cultured, and decidedly cold. You're late. I apologize, Your Grace. The mail coach was delayed by, he waved away her explanation. I've read your references. They speak highly of your educational qualifications but say little of your character. Penelope's heart pounded. Had he heard the whispers? Did he know of the scandal that had driven her from her previous post? I assure you, my character is beyond reproach, she said, though the lie tasted bitter. Lord Kensington studied her with penetrating grey eyes. Is it? Then perhaps you can explain why Lady Worthington dismissed you without notice after 3 years of otherwise satisfactory service. The blood drained from Penelope's face. There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that resulted in your immediate dismissal without reference. Come, Miss Harrington, I'm not a fool. Penelope clasped her trembling hands. Your Grace, if you know this, why did you offer me the position? A humorless smile touched his lips. Because you were the only applicant with the qualifications I require who was desperate enough to accept the salary offered. My children have become something of a legend among governesses in the county. The blunt admission startled her. I see. No, I don't believe you do. He gestured to a chair. Sit, Miss Harrington. She obeyed, perching on the edge of a leather armchair while he remained standing. My children have lost their mother and, it seems, their ability to form attachments. For governesses have failed to reach them. I require someone who will not abandon them at the first difficulty, who will give them the maternal guidance they so desperately need. His words struck Penelope with unexpected force. With respect, Your Grace, I am a governess, not a mother. I'm aware of the distinction, he replied sharply. But these children need more than French verbs and watercolors. They need consistency, discipline tempered with affection, and someone who will not flee at the first sign of trouble. Like their previous governesses, Penelope supplied. Lord Kensington's expression darkened. Precisely. Miss Whitman left because Sophia placed a frog in her bed. Miss Preston departed after Edward cut holes in her dresses. Miss Thornhill couldn't tolerate Sophia's silent treatment, and Miss Bailey. He hesitated. Miss Bailey had other reasons. Penelope recognized the evasion but did not press. I understand the challenges, Your Grace, and I assure you I am equal to them. Are you? He studied her intently. You appear rather fragile for the task. The assessment stung her pride. Appearances can be deceiving, Your Grace. I may not look formidable, but I assure you I possess both the determination and patience your children require. For the first time, something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Very well, Miss Harrington. You shall have a month's trial. If you succeed where others have failed, the position is yours permanently. And if I fail?" His expression hardened. "Then you will leave without reference, as did your predecessors." The stakes were impossibly high. Without a reference, Penelope would have no hope of securing another respectable position. It would mean debtor's prison or worse. "I accept your terms," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Good." Lord Kensington moved toward the door. "One final condition, Miss Harrington. Whatever scandal drove you from London stays buried. My household will not be tainted by impropriety." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the dancing shadows and the weight of her secrets. The first weeks at Kensington Hall passed in a series of small battles. True to their reputation, the children employed every strategy to drive her away. Sophia's tactics were psychological, snide comments, deliberate failures at lessons, and once, a cruel mimicry of Penelope's accent that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Edward was more direct in his rebellion. He hid her spectacles, poured ink over lesson books, and once locked her in the linen cupboard for an hour before Mrs. Pembroke discovered her. Each night, Penelope returned to her small chamber exhausted but determined. She wrote in her journal by candlelight, analyzing the day's conflicts and planning new approaches. The children were not merely misbehaving, they were grieving and afraid. On the 15th day, the turning point came unexpectedly. Penelope had taken the children to the gardens for a natural history lesson when rain began to fall suddenly and heavily. They raced for shelter in a small gardener's cottage, arriving soaked and breathless. "Your dress is ruined," Sophia observed with unusual concern as Penelope wrung water from her skirts. "It will dry," Penelope replied, though the dress was one of only 3 she possessed. Edward sneezed violently, and Penelope immediately removed her shawl, wrapping it around his small shoulders despite her own shivering. "You'll catch cold," she explained, rubbing his arms to warm him. Sophia watched with a strange expression. "Miss Bailey would have scolded us for getting wet." "Getting caught in the rain is hardly your fault," Penelope said, stoking the cottage's small fireplace. "Though I dare say you'd both benefit from a hot bath once we return to the house." They huddled together as the rain pounded the roof, and Penelope began telling them a story to pass the time, a fairy tale her own mother had shared, about a princess who disguised herself as a goose girl. When she finished, Edward looked up with wide eyes. "My mamma told stories too." The simple statement, offered without his usual defiance, caught Penelope off guard. "Did she? What kind of stories?" "About knights and dragons," Sophia answered softly. "And sometimes about the stars." Penelope smiled. "The stars have wonderful stories. Perhaps tomorrow night, if it's clear, we could observe them together." To her surprise, both children nodded eagerly. When the rain finally subsided, they walked back to the house hand in hand, a tableau observed by Lord Kensington from his study window with undisguised astonishment. That night, a package arrived at Penelope's door, a new dress to replace the one ruined by the rain. The accompanying note read simply, "The children mentioned your sacrifice. Consider this a necessary expense for their education." VK the gesture, practical rather than sentimental, nevertheless warmed Penelope in unexpected ways. She traced her fingers over the firm handwriting, wondering about the man who penned it. The following weeks brought gradual but significant changes. The children's resistance softened. Lessons proceeded with fewer interruptions. Sophia began to seek Penelope's approval, proudly displaying her needlework or reciting French poetry without prompting. Edward, still reserved, nevertheless began sitting beside Penelope during story time, occasionally leaning against her side in a gesture that made her heart ache. Lord Kensington remained distant, though his interactions with Penelope became less formal. He began requesting weekly progress reports, listening with evident interest to her assessment of the children's development. Occasionally, she caught him observing their lessons from doorways, his expression unreadable. As the end of her trial month approached, Penelope realized with startling clarity that the prospect of leaving Kensington Hall had become unbearable. She had grown attached not only to the children but to the austere beauty of the estate, the rhythm of its days, and most troublingly, to its enigmatic master. On the final evening of her probation, Penelope put the children to bed with a story about a family of rabbits who lived in the gardens of a grand estate. Edward fell asleep before she finished, his small hand clutching hers. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" Sophia asked as Penelope tucked the blankets around her. "I don't know," Penelope answered honestly. "That depends on your father's assessment of my performance." Sophia's eyes, so like her father's, studied Penelope intently. "I don't want you to go." The simple declaration brought a lump to Penelope's throat. "I don't want to leave you either, Sophia." "Then stay." The child's logic was beautifully uncomplicated. If only it were that simple, Penelope smiled sadly, pressing a kiss to Sophia's forehead before extinguishing the lamp. She was crossing the corridor to her own chamber when a deep voice startled her. A word, "Miss Harrington." Lord Kensington stood at the end of the hallway, a single candle illuminating his features in golden light. He gestured toward the staircase, and Penelope followed him to the library. Unlike their first meeting, the room was dimly lit, the fire burned low in the grate. Lord Kensington poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, offering one to Penelope. "Sherry," he explained at her hesitation. "I thought you might appreciate fortification for our conversation." She accepted the glass but did not drink. "Have you made your decision, then?" He moved to stand before the fireplace, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. "I have observed a remarkable transformation in my children this past month. Sophia completes her lessons without complaint. Edward speaks more in your presence than he has since his mother died." Relief flooded Penelope's chest, but she remained cautious. "I'm pleased to hear it. Mrs. Pembroke informs me that Edward embraced you yesterday and called you a mother." His voice held no accusation, merely curiosity. Penelope's cheeks flushed. "He was overtired, Your Grace." "I corrected him immediately." "Did you?" Lord Kensington turned to face her fully. "And how did that correction make you feel?" The question was unexpected, intimate in ways that made Penelope uncomfortable. It's not my place to encourage such confusion." "That wasn't my question." Penelope stared into her untouched sherry. "It broke my heart," she admitted quietly. "But I am merely their governess, not their mother. I cannot replace Lady Kensington." Lord Kensington's expression softened imperceptibly. "No one can replace Catherine. But perhaps—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps the children need not see it as replacement but as addition." "I don't understand." He set down his glass with deliberate care. "Your month's trial has ended, Miss Harrington. I would like you to remain at Kensington Hall permanently." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Your Grace. I accept." "I haven't finished." He took a step closer. "There is the matter of your past to address." Penelope's momentary joy evaporated. "My past?" "I made inquiries. I know why Lady Worthington dismissed you." The blood drained from Penelope's face. "Your Grace, I can explain, you were falsely accused of impropriety with her son. He made advances, you rejected them, and he retaliated with accusations that his mother believed." Penelope stared at him in shock. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Worthington's son has a reputation for such behavior. You weren't his first victim, merely his most recent." Lord Kensington's expression darkened. "What I find most telling is that despite the injustice, you've never spoken ill of the family." "It would serve no purpose," Penelope replied softly. "And I needed work desperately enough to bury my pride." Lord Kensington studied her with newfound respect. "Your discretion is admirable, as is your resilience." He moved closer still, close enough that Penelope could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his evening coat. "Which brings me to my proposition." "Proposition?" The word emerged as barely a whisper. "My children need stability. They need someone who will not abandon them, who will guide them with wisdom and affection. They need a mother." Penelope's heart pounded so violently she feared he must hear it. "Your Grace, I don't, Vincent," he corrected gently. "My name is Vincent." "Lord Kensington," she insisted, clinging to formality as a drowning woman to driftwood. "Whatever you're suggesting, I'm suggesting marriage, Miss Harrington." His directness stunned her to silence. "A practical arrangement that would benefit us both. You would have security and position. My children would have the maternal influence they so desperately need." Penelope found her voice at last. "And what would you have, Your Grace?" "Peace," he answered simply. "The knowledge that my household is in capable hands, that my children are loved, that the burden of their emotional welfare doesn't rest solely on my inadequate shoulders." "You speak as if this were merely a business transaction. Isn't that what most aristocratic marriages are?" His tone was bitter. "I was fortunate once to marry for love. I don't expect such luck twice in a lifetime." The implication that he considered marrying her luck at all sent an unexpected warmth through Penelope's chest. "This is unconventional." "Decidedly," he agreed. "Society will whisper, of course. The Duke's son who married his children's governess. But society whispers regardless, and I've long since ceased to care for its opinion." Penelope set down her glass with trembling hands. "May I speak plainly, Your Grace?" "I wish you would." "You don't love me." Vincent's expression remained inscrutable. "I respect you. I admire your patience, your intellect, your kindness toward my children. Love may come in time, or it may not. I offer honesty instead of pretty lies." His pragmatism was oddly touching. Penelope considered her options with the clear-eyed assessment that had sustained her through previous hardships. Refusing meant continuing as governess until the children outgrew her services, then seeking another position with the spectre of scandal forever at her heels. Accepting meant security, position, and most temptingly, a permanent place in the lives of two children she had come to love. And there was Vincent himself, a complex man whose grief and devotion to his children had created a shell of stern reserve that only occasionally revealed glimpses of the person beneath. "I have conditions," she said finally. Vincent's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Name them." "I will not be a silent partner in this arrangement. I expect consultation in matters regarding the children's upbringing and education." "Granted." "I wish to establish a small school on the estate for the tenants' children. Education should not be the privilege of the wealthy alone." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "A commendable ambition." "I agree." Penelope took a deep breath. "And I will have my own chamber until such time as we both desire otherwise." Color rose in Vincent's cheeks, but he nodded. "I would not force intimacies where they're unwelcome." "Then," Penelope said with remarkable steadiness, "I accept your proposal, Lord Kensington." "Vincent," he corrected again, taking her hand. "If we are to be married, you must use my given name." "Vincent," she repeated, the word strange on her tongue. His hand was warm around hers, strong and unexpectedly gentle. He released her after a moment that stretched between them like a silken thread. "We shall be married quietly, here in the village church. No need for London spectacle." "When?" The practicality of the question made him smile. "A month hence?" "That should allow time for banns and preparations, however modest." Penelope nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of the decision. "I should retire. The children will be awake early." Vincent escorted her to the library door. "I shall inform them of our engagement tomorrow. I suspect Sophia, at least, will be pleased." "And Edward?" A shadow crossed his face. "Edward barely remembers his mother. He has already claimed you for that role." As Penelope climbed the stairs to her chamber, emotion threatened to overwhelm her. She had arrived at Kensington Hall broken by scandal and desperate for employment. Now, a month later, she had found not only purpose but the promise of family. It was not a love match, not yet, but perhaps affection might grow in the fertile ground of mutual respect. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Banns were read in the village church, raising eyebrows but little outright objection. The children's reaction to the news had been revealing, Sophia's careful assessment followed by calculated approval, Edward's simple acceptance, as if the arrangement merely confirmed what he already believed to be true. Vincent proved more attentive than Penelope had anticipated. He sought her opinion on estate matters, invited her to dine with him in the evenings, and gradually revealed aspects of himself previously hidden. She learned of his passion for architecture, his secret talent for sketching, and his genuine concern for the welfare of his tenants. In turn, she shared her own history, her father's death when she was 12, her mother's struggle to maintain genteel poverty, her determination to secure education that would allow her independence. Vincent listened with evident interest, asking questions that demonstrated genuine curiosity about her life before Kensington Hall. The evening before their wedding, Vincent found Penelope in the garden, gathering late roses for Sophia's hair the following day. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked without preamble. Penelope looked up, startled by his directness. "No." "Are you?" "None." His certainty was oddly comforting. "But I wonder if I've been unfair, asking you to accept so practical an arrangement." She considered her response carefully. "Life has taught me that practical arrangements often provide more lasting happiness than passionate beginnings." "Is that what you believe? Or what you tell yourself to accept this situation?" The question was too perceptive, cutting close to doubt she had buried. "Both, perhaps." Vincent took the basket of roses from her hands, setting it aside on a stone bench. "I have not been entirely honest with you, Penelope." Her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Oh." "When I proposed this arrangement, I presented it as purely practical, a solution to the children's needs and your circumstances. Wasn't it?" He shook his head slowly. "Not entirely. I began to notice you before the children did. Your patience, your quiet strength, the grace with which you handled their rebellion. I admired you first, then found myself watching for you, listening for your voice in the corridors." Penelope's heart quickened. "Vincent, let me finish." He took her hands in his touch warm even through her gloves. "I don't claim to love you as I loved Catherine. That was the love of youth, uncomplicated by life's hardships. What I feel for you is different, a respect that has deepened into affection, an admiration that grows daily, and yes, a desire I've been too proper to acknowledge." Penelope's cheeks flushed. "Why tell me this now?" "Because tomorrow you become my wife, and I would not have you enter that state believing yourself merely a convenient solution to a family problem." His eyes, usually so guarded, held a warmth that made her breath catch. "You deserve better than that, Penelope." "And what do I deserve?" The question was barely a whisper. Vincent's answer was not in words but in action. He drew her gently toward him, giving her ample opportunity to retreat. When she didn't, his lips found hers in a kiss so tender it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. When they parted, Penelope remained in the circle of his arms, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I believe," she said quietly, "that I may have been less than honest as well." "How so?" His voice rumbled beneath her ear. "I've told myself this arrangement was practical, that affection might come in time. But the truth is, I began falling in love with this family, all of it, weeks ago." Vincent's arms tightened around her. "Then perhaps our marriage will not be so practical after all." The wedding the following day was simple but joyful. The village church was decorated with late summer flowers, the local gentry attended out of curiosity as much as courtesy, and the children played their roles with surprising decorum. Sophia, radiant with roses in her copper hair, scattered petals with solemn precision. Edward, overcome with importance, carried the rings on a small velvet cushion without mishap. As Penelope spoke her vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had arrived at Kensington Hall broken by scandal and desperate for employment. Now she stood beside a man who looked at her with undisguised admiration, promising to share his life, his name, his children. The wedding breakfast at the hall was more elaborate than Penelope had expected, with tenants and villagers invited to share in the celebration. As Lady Kensington, she received congratulations with a grace that surprised even herself, Vincent's steady presence beside her a constant reassurance. As dusk fell, the guests departed, leaving the family alone in the great house that no longer felt imposing but welcoming. Vincent carried an exhausted Edward to bed while Penelope helped Sophia prepare for sleep. "Are you really my mother now?" Sophia asked as Penelope brushed out her hair. "I am your stepmother," Penelope answered carefully. "I cannot replace your mother, Sophia, nor would I try. But I promise to love you as if you were my own child." Sophia considered this with characteristic seriousness. "I think Mama would approve. She told us before she died that Papa would be lonely without her. Is he lonely still, do you think?" Sophia shook her head decisively. "Not anymore. He smiles when you're in the room. Not with his mouth, always, but with his eyes." The observation, so astute from one so young, touched Penelope deeply. "You are very perceptive, Sophia. Mama said that too." The child's expression grew solemn. "I shall always remember her." "Of course you will," Penelope assured her. "And we shall speak of her often, so that her memory remains alive in this house." Sophia nodded, satisfied, and allowed Penelope to tuck her beneath the covers. "Good night, Mother." The title, offered hesitantly but deliberately, brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "Good night, my darling." She found Vincent waiting in the corridor, his expression soft as he observed her emotion. Without words, he offered his handkerchief, then his arm, escorting her to the rooms that had been prepared for them, connecting chambers that offered both privacy and proximity. At the threshold of her chamber, he paused. "I meant what I said yesterday, Penelope. There will be no expectations until you're ready." She studied the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time, the strong features softened by genuine concern, the grey eyes that watched her with careful attention. "Vincent," she said quietly, taking his hand. "I believe I am ready now." His breath caught. "Are you certain?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that held promise rather than hesitation. Later, as moonlight spilled through the windows of their shared chamber, Penelope rested her head on Vincent's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder, a gentle caress that spoke of affection deepening into love. "I came to Kensington Hall broken," she murmured, half to herself. Vincent's arms tightened around her. "And now?" Penelope raised her head to meet his gaze, finding in it everything she had never dared to hope for: respect, desire, and most precious of all, love. "Now," she said with absolute certainty, "I am whole."